Hello and welcome to the Aquarium Dilemmas podcast. I'm your host, ScienceGal Aquatics. I'm Kerri, and this is my co-host,
Jesse. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Today on episode 4, we're diving into substrates. In our previous episodes, we went over tank size, where you might put it, and then on another episode, we went into some of the mistakes we've made through the years.
Yes, and there is many, and I'm sure more to come. But today we're going to pick up the conversation about what to start putting into your aquarium, and that's substrate. And there's so many different kinds that I never expected to open myself up and be able to use. I was kind of stuck into my box, and I always used aquarium gravel. And I'm so glad that I did some research and opened up my mind to different substrates, because there's so many different ones on the market. And it's an interesting conversation to talk about them and see what works best for you. If not just one, maybe mix it together like I do.
Well, what's the main difference, Kerri? I know we have kind of two different types of substrates. You have an inert substrate and then a buffering type substrate. Can you kind of explain briefly what that is?
Well, I have a lot more experience when it comes to the inert substrates, and that's your sand, rock, gravel, things that you usually have to add nutrients to the water. You have to fertilize those substrates, whereas the active ones, I don't have that much experience with them. And in fact, I used them wrong for a while before I realized it. But those, you have a lot of nutrients that come with it, so you don't usually have to fertilize as much. But there's active soils, and Fluvostratum has a lot of extra nutrients. It's more of it, from what I understand, more of an active type substrate. But I definitely have more experience when it comes to the inert substrates. And I have used a few different fertilizers with them over the years, but I do have my favorite. And like I said, starting off with my background, I just used aquarium gravel. I went to the pet store, I picked up my neon colors, and I loved it. That's what I used, and I was proud of it with my guppies, and I was a teenager, and I used that. And I was pretty closed-minded because I just had no idea there was anything else out there. So that was my background before I went into sand next. When it came to my guppy experiment, when I was working on my undergrad, I had finally realized that you could put sand in a tank, and I did not
Well, to take a
realize it.
step back, colored gravel for colored guppies, I guess.
Yes, and I was so proud of those tanks. I really was. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you like. But I was really happy to find sand and just kind of, like I said, open up my mind to something different. And it wasn't that I was I wasn't I didn't want to not use it. I just didn't know about it. So if that makes sense. So I'm really glad that my mind opened up, and I go to the hardware store, but there's several different types of sand that you can use in your tank. And same with gravel and rock. You can go on a low budget to a high budget. And so I think that's one of the factors when it does come to picking out substrates, whether it's a sand, a more active substrate, or pea gravel, is the size of your tank and your budget when it comes
there's
to substrate.
A couple different factors.
Yeah. So what's some factors that you think of?
Fish species, number
Yes.
1.
Yes.
Then number 2, are you going to plan on planting it?
Yes. I know when it comes to fish, that is a pretty good factor, because there's some that are diggers. And if you go, I like to go to the creek and the river with the kids, and we come home with a bucket full of gravel and rocks. And that can be sharp when it comes to the goldfish that I've had in the past that were always digging around. They were pickers, so they were always, so that might have a factor in is the type of fish that you have. If there's something that always is at the surface and never goes down to the substrate, then it doesn't really factor in. But if you have something like a Corydoras or something that's actively siphoning through,
sifting
through,
and turning,
then you might have to be a little bit more aware of if it's something more on the smoother side or something a little bit more collected and a little sharper.
Well, and you can do the same thing going to your local hardware store. They have several different sizes of pea gravel, sand, and everything that you can get from the fish store is just refined a little bit more. If you get it from the hardware store, just FYI, you're going to be doing some rinsing.
Yes. And that's one thing. If you do decide to go a little bit cheaper and pick it up from wherever the hardware store that you go to, keep in mind that is whenever you think it's done, rinse it again. But we put it in a 5-gallon bucket and just rinse it with the water hose and then dump it, rinse it, dump it until it runs kind of somewhat clear, and then you rinse it and dump it again, and then I let it
just
dry.
Let it sit and dry.
Yeah, let it sit and dry for a while before I put it in the tank. But yeah.
If you're quick, fast, and in a hurry, then you will buy the smaller bag of gravel from your pet store or your local fish store. And that small bag of gravel will probably do a smaller tank. If you've been in the hobby for a long time, when you get up to those bigger tanks, that's going to cost a lot of money in substrate. So you have to, again, the dilemma, you have to balance out your time versus how much you're willing to spend to make the tank look what you want it to look like.
Yes, because there's a difference in price when it comes to putting substrate in a 5-gallon, 10-gallon versus the 180-gallon tank upstairs. And even going a little bit cheaper, it can still add up a little bit. But even with the sand too, or rocks that you collect at the river, just clean them. And I've collected a driftwood piece in the past too, and I put it in the outside tubs, and I was being lazy, and I just put it in there, and there was a leech on there. So just make sure you rinse them and clean. If it's a smaller driftwood piece, not rocks, don't boil rocks, but if it's a driftwood piece or some leaves, some botanicals, make sure I boil them first before I put them in the tank. But rocks, don't do that. Don't do that. Just rinse them with water and just keep rinsing till you feel like you've got all of the dirt off. But that is a factor. If you go to the pet store and you pick up some aquarium substrate from the pet store that's made for aquariums, you don't have to rinse it. I usually, with the sand, if it's a higher end sand, that's one of the perks is I just put it in the tank, and it does seem to settle faster too. But it's a lot more expensive.
Well, it's already been, they've done the work for you. They've rinsed it. It's been refined. It's been sorted, taken care of. Whereas if you get it from a hardware store, if you go out and get it yourself even, you're going to have to do a little bit more work. But if the value of that little bit more work saves you the money you're wanting to do something else, let's say buy another fish, add more plants to that said substrate, then it could be worth it to you. That is the dilemma with substrate. Are you planting it? What type of fish are you going to have in there? And then your budget.
Yes. Those are, I think, 3 big factors when it comes to deciding substrate. And I was guilty for a long too. Not only was I closed-minded, but I was closed-minded to trying different types of substrate in the same tank. So now that when I was doing that research for my undergrad and I welcomed the world of sand into my life, I had a gravel tank and a sand tank. And I was curious why my sand tanks did a little bit better than the gravel tanks when it came to algae. And so that's what kind of intrigued me with that. But from all of that, I realized, maybe you can mix these two together. And so now one of my favorite substrates is a pea gravel sand mix. I find that does really good in my fish room, kind of mixing them together. And whether you want to put just the gravel at the bottom and then put the sand on top or kind of mix them together. Either way, that's my favorite.
That is my favorite as well. I would say layering it with bigger gravel on the bottom, pouring sand in between it, and then sprinkling smaller pea gravel on top. So you have a variety of bacteria that can grow, and depending on whether you have, like you said earlier, Corydoras, you have plecos, some type of pleco. There's the L numbers go on forever in your tank. Anything that wants to pick at the bottom has plenty enough space to pick around on rocks, pick in the sand, shrimp, anything else that wants to ruffle around in your proverbial glass box.
And I like that combination too for my plants. I feel like my plants do really well with that combination because the gravel gives some space for the roots to kind of grow through the sand, but yet I still have, I don't know if it's a drastic difference, but it was a little bit to the eye, a little bit better, less algae on the front of the glass when it came to the sand tanks. So I like to always sprinkle the sand in the tanks, but I feel like that does best for my planted tanks. I really like that combination. But another thing I was guilty of in the beginning too was not making my substrate deep enough. So now I always went by the rule that my dad said was just all you need is 1 inch of substrate and you're good. Just a little bit. But I find that making my substrates a little bit deeper when it comes to my planted tanks, especially, my tanks do a lot better.
And in our experience, if you're using any type of more active substrate, such as dirt, such as fluval stratum.
It's not just dirt. It's an active aquarium soil.
Yes.
The expensive stuff.
Yes.
There is more nutrients. I don't know if I've said this or not, but that does come with more nutrients. So if you do get some kind of substrate that's an active substrate, don't rinse it before you put it in the tank. Just put it in.
Yeah. And we like to cap it with just a little bit of sand. Helps hold everything down, keep all the nutrients down in the substrate, and allows the plants to feed for a longer time.
Yes, I just mount all my tanks now with sand. And if I do find, once they've been set up for a while, and I feel like I need to add a little bit more, I never take substrate out. I just layer onto it. So in time, my substrates will hopefully be, good, and the plants will be settled and everything will be cycled, but are established and balanced really well. But I feel like the deeper substrates do better, but I also still do them slowly. I'll add what I think is good, and then over time I'll add some more. I just don't take anything out to replace it. I just keep adding.
More of a lasagna concept.
Yeah. But there is also, if you decide you want to get pea gravel or you want rock or you want even a sand, they come in different sizes too. So that's another decision you have to make, is what size of substrate that you want. If you want it more of a finer, really small grain sand, or really coarse, or up to river stone. They just come in so many different sizes and variations that if you're indecisive like me, it's best to kind of think it through before you just wing it and be like, I like this. But I know a lot of people like the look of a natural tank and they like sand, but I feel like pea gravel is the most common. I feel like you can find pea gravel the easiest over sand. But everybody has their own preference. Like I said, mine's gravel with the sand mix, but I feel like definitely gravel is the easiest to find.
On the sand note, again, back to species-specific fish. Mm-hmm. Another very small mistake that has been made with substrate. Had a wonderful goldfish tank. Mm-hmm. Redid it, decided that was going to make it mostly sand, a little bit of gravel. ScienceGal decided she wanted to go with white sand with goldfish.
Yes.
You might want to think about the bioload of your fish.
Yeah, you had to usually I don't recommend aquarium vacuuming all the time, but with sand, you do have to keep in mind with a high bioload fish that does settle right on top of the sand. Whereas if you do add a little bit more gravel to that, then it has kind of a place to hide and fall through there. So you don't notice it as much. And I tried to have plants with them goldfish, but like every goldfish, they ate them up. So they got an even bigger home. But if that's something to think about, I would recommend a smaller bioload fish because that does settle right on top. But that's kind of the difference between some of the maintenance between gravel and sand too is it's not complicated and it's most definitely not hard, but you just have to be aware that when you do aquarium vac, you don't want to just stick that right in your sand because you will vacuum up all your sand right out of your tank. So you have to kind of swirl it a little bit and then lightly hover it, whereas with the gravel, it's heavy enough that it usually doesn't suction right up. But especially if you decide to go with a larger substrate, like with river stones or something like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that going back to my point, the species, and then can you or can you not have plants with them in your substrate? Goldfish, like we just said, you could have them. You could try it. We did not have luck with it. They destroyed it.
And I knew that was going to happen too, but I wanted to try it to see. And if you've got a really thick, established, well-grown, maybe a Nubis or something really like a thicker leaf plant, maybe you could, but the little plants that I tried, no. And it was and same with the pleco too. It wasn't so much that he ate the plant, he just constantly uprooted the plant. So. Yep.
I mean, you have that for all different species of fish. I mean, from cichlids to goldfish. I mean, we can't keep one with the arowana.
No, I've tried that too.
he swims around and knocks it and drags it up out of the substrate if that's what it takes.
And another thing to think about too when it comes to, like, I've got plecos in my tank, so they do like a higher flow when it comes to my filtration. So that might be a factor too. If you have a fish that really likes high flow and you have a sand substrate, don't put the filter real close to your substrate so you constantly get it in your filter because you don't want sand in your filtration by any means. So you might have to get a filter that's a little bit higher in your tank, whereas the gravel and river stones and things like that, you don't have to worry about that getting sucked up all the time.
Yep. Everything and all of these dilemmas link together between what you're wanting your tank to ultimately for you to look like. If you're a master breeder, been in the hobby forever, you're probably not worried about much of that.
Well, you probably just know what works. I like to experiment all the time. And like I said, I tried gravel for a while, and then my eyes opened up to sand, and then I realized that you could put things together. Who would have thought? And I do think one substrate that I wouldn't necessarily recommend for beginners, but I have had really good luck with that is a pretty close second when it comes to my plants is a dirted tank. I have 2 dirted tanks, And that was something that took me a while to convince myself. And I don't know why, because it makes sense. Plants grow in dirt. There's dirt at the river. Like, I don't know why it was so, I was like, do I really want to do this? Do I? But I'm so glad I did. In the beginning, if you don't like the look of tannins in your water, you might not like a dirted tank. But during that first, I would say, month it took to clear up, the plants and the fish did really well in those tanks. But it looked dirty. It was brown, but
it was like a light coffee.
Mm-hmm. But the plants and the fish loved it, from what I thought. So that's another substrate that I wouldn't necessarily recommend to someone with their first tank, but someone that knows what they're doing. I think it's something that you should definitely try. Yeah. But I do put a sand cap on my dirty tanks, and it works out really well.
We will go into that in another dilemma about how tanks cycle, because there is a little asterisk at the end of her statement there. You will want a cap on. Yeah,
you'll want a cap, because otherwise you'll just have a bunch of dirt all over in your tank.
Yeah. We'll talk
about...
There's a gas exchange and some other things that happen, but we will go into that in a cycling episode.
Balancing and making your tank perfectly cycled is an art form that took me a while, that I still need to work on.
Fingers crossed.
So let's say our factors when it comes to substrate that we've talked about so far is your fish, if they're diggers, if they're pickers, if they're going to rearrange. I've had fish in the past that no matter how I thought the tank needed to look, they thought it needed to be arranged a certain way. And every morning I would wake up to it looking different. So they would just constantly pick and move. And so, yeah, and your budget, your tank size, what size of substrate you want to go with. And even with sand, there's pool filter sand, there's black diamond blasting sand.
Oh, yeah.
I like paver sand myself. That's the one at the hardware store I usually gravitate towards. I've tried the pool filter sand. I've tried the high-end sand. Same with the rocks. I've gotten the gravel from the aquarium store to the river. So, yeah.
Yeah. Everything from Dragonstone to gravel from the creek.
Yes. And another thing to think about too is with your with your substrate, that's a good place that you want a lot of your good bacteria in your tank. You're going to find stuff all over your filter, your decor, everything, but that's your substrate too. So sand has the most surface area out of all of them. So there's a lot of good bacteria that grows on all that surface area. So that's something to think about too, is all the beneficial bacteria that resides all in your substrate.
And whether you're going to plant it. That to me that's my spot in my heart is.
He'll always come back to plants.
Am I putting plants in this tank? And if I'm putting plants in this tank, you can bet if I'm not using a active substrate in there of some sort too, I'm going to have sand in there and some root tabs, because the sand will help hold my stem plants down.
I will have to say though, if you are using an active substrate, one of the mistakes that I find is a mistake, when I was using it, I was using a lot of it. And I don't have Caridina shrimp. I have Neo-Caridina shrimp. So I thought they needed all of that, which I don't have Caridina shrimp. I don't have an RO unit. I don't have any of that. So all of that extra nutrients, I didn't have a lot of plants at the time to use all that. And I have a big problem with not turning off my lights properly. So all of those nutrients and all of that extra light with not enough plants created quite the algae mess. So keep that in mind. I now use it sparingly. If I have a bunch of plants in a corner, I might kind of sprinkle some in here and there, but I don't use it as much as I'll just kind of sprinkle it in here and there. But I use more of the gravel and sand. And then 2 of my tanks, I do have the dirt sand cap, but I don't use it as much as I don't put 2 bags in each tank anymore. I don't do that.
It would be fine if the tank was heavily planted with plants that would be able to absorb that amount.
Yes. Like now I'm starting to get more and more plants in the fish room, so... And some tanks just naturally do better. I can have 2 tanks set up the same way, and one's probably just going to do better. But if you pick out a substrate, just the thing to do is just look into it. If that's what you like, if that's what catches your eye and you want to look into it, just make sure that you do your research with everything that comes, your filtration, your substrate, the fish you're going to keep, the size of your tank, just everything together. It's worth taking some time and diving down and reading and researching and learning how to use everything properly.
I will say the top 2 for me are the sand and the gravel. Mm-hmm. However, we have tried about all different setups.
Yeah, we do have a lot of different setups.
We even got a seashell tank.
Yes.
As I stutter.
Uh-huh. Well. Let's see, going back to, if you do collect from, like I do, the river and the creek and things like that, they say, I've heard, that might break down and add a little bit. And I don't feel like I have a drastic swings of those things breaking down. But if you do go to the aquarium store and you pick up an aquarium gravel, it's coated with a coating so those don't break down and they are smoother. So that is something that I wanted to mention, is it does have some kind, I guess it's an epoxy or some kind of something on it it prevents that. But the tanks that I have, the stuff we got from the river and the creek, I don't have drastic numbers from my substrate breaking down. I don't feel like I do.
No, it's an inert substrate. It will break down,
but it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a 20-year span. Mm-hmm. You would have to keep that tank set up for that long, and then actively monitor your tank of your hardness and everything else to see. And it would probably move at a minute level.
Well, what do you think is a perk to gravel, and what do you think is a perk to sand, and a disadvantage?
Disadvantage to sand would be cleaning.
The aquarium vacuum?
Yes.
Or rinsing? Before
both. It takes twice as long on both.
Well, it doesn't necessarily take twice as long, as it's just I'm way more aware of what I'm doing, but I don't dig into my substrates like I used to either when I clean my aquariums. I used to, every time I maintenance the tank, cleaned all the substrate, and now I don't do that. So if I do, it's just because there's a really bad spot that I feel like needs to be cleaned, but I don't dig around in there like I used to. But definitely I would say the maintenance, it's just a little bit, I just have to be more aware of what you're doing.
I think the pro to the gravel is it is super easy to get, whether you're getting it from fish store, hardware store, just going out and getting it. Mm-hmm. It's everywhere. Mm-hmm. Less work to get it prepped and ready. You still have to rinse it if you're getting it from an outside source. Mm-hmm. And it's just more versatile, I feel, for a multitude of tanks.
Yes. I feel like a perk to gravel, too, is it hides a bunch of stuff, the bioload. If you have some egg scatterers in your tank, it gives the eggs a chance to kind of fall through the gravel so they won't get eaten maybe immediately. And so I think that's a perk to gravel. A disadvantage is I feel like you can have a little bit of extra bacteria in your sand tanks because it is so close together. You can have, there's bacteria that has oxygen and bacteria that doesn't need oxygen. And so I feel like that's a perk to the sand tanks too, is you get a little bit more different types of bacteria. That's the reason I kind of like to mix them together a little bit. But I don't have a problem with pockets either of little toxic bubbles from having sand tanks. I kind of stir it up every so often with just my finger if it's a deeper substrate. But that is a perk to keeping Corydoras or something that's constantly kind of shifting through your substrate is I don't have a problem with anything like that. If that's something that's deciding which one to go with, I don't have too much of a problem with anything like that. But the only thing we really add to our substrate would be root tabs every so often when I remember. And we do use every so often oyster shells. We'll put it in an aquarium bag and put it in the filter for a little while. If I feel like the snails need a little bit more calcium to their shells. The snails.
Which doesn't happen often because we already have hard water.
Yeah. But that's really the only thing I can think of that we add to the substrate would be root tabs. And we don't even add, you can sprinkle the oyster shells in the substrate, but I find it easier just to put it in the filter. But that's not adding to the substrate, but it's something we add to the tank.
It would be considered a type
but I use very little of it.
It would be considered a type of buffering agent. It would just takes a lot longer to break down. Mm-hmm.
Well, is there anything that you think we haven't covered, kind of wrapping things up? Or do you think like we've covered substrate? Everything will come to us once we stop.
It all boils down to your dilemma, your budget, your species, and your plants.
What you like. Just what you like. If it's your fish room or your one aquarium or somewhere in between, you want to come home and be like, oh, that's just beautiful. So
there's no right or wrong way. And the great thing with substrate is you can just keep adding. You don't have to remove. If you don't like how it started, add to it.
Yeah. And kind of on the last note, I feel like you need substrate, but sometimes certain tanks you don't even need to have substrate. So that's another dilemma with substrate. If you want to keep a bare bottom tank or go with a substrate that you like. I find no substrate works best for hospital tanks, but even that is a decision that we didn't even touch on, is if you really even need it. I feel like you do. But certain circumstances, you don't even have to have a substrate. So
a non-substrate tank, in my mind, is a quarantine tank.
Yes, but my quarantine tanks always become a regular aquarium.
Thus having to buy another
and
tank
then I set up another quarantine tank. But I feel like, again, your fish, your budget, there's all kinds of factors when it comes to picking your substrate. But it comes down to what you like, what you can afford, and what your fish is happy with. So
I can agree to that.
Mm-hmm. But thank you so much for listening. I'm so glad that you've been here for the discussion over substrates, and I'm sure we will talk about this again in the future. But if you would like to watch this podcast, go ahead and check out the memberships on ScienceGal Aquatics on YouTube. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and we'll
You'll
see you
hear us
soon.
in the next episode.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you again. Bye.